background is in education, working on PhD research, education on educational barriers faced by many Somali ethnic minorities in northern Somalia, mainly Somaliland. That's what I'm working on right now, but I also do work on human rights education, global education, and multicultural education as well.
Okay. And in terms of human rights education and the lack of it, as a word, in the history of Somalia, how has that fared compared to post-Civil War?
Human rights education is a big global education that's going on now. It's been happening since the 60s, but we've never really addressed that in Somalia. Had we had human rights education in Somalia early on, I personally don't think we would have had the 21 years of conflict and problems. So this is going to be something new that I'm recommending.
Okay. In terms of the material that has been available in terms of minority groups of Somalia, before you go into the material in terms of groups and stuff, could you just first of all explain to us what that means in context to Somali society, minority groups?
Okay. Well, in the Somali society itself, there's something called basically the Somali people. And every time you read about the Somali people, they always classify them as two groups. One group being the four major clans, for example, the Dir, Darod, and Hawiye, and Rahawain, for example. Those are called the big clans. And the other phenomena, sometimes they say six, by saying the Dir, Darod, Isaq, Hawiye are being four, and then you have the Digil and Rifle, which is another. So either way you look at it, those are the pure Somalis. That's what Somalis will say, that's what people would write down. Leaving out other groups, and that's almost close to 25% of the population, by relegating them to status called minorities or outside of these six. And that's what the minorities are created of. Now, we have a large minority because there's, in southern Somalia, for example, there's the Somali Bantu groups, and there are many other minorities in that area. But when you come closer to the northwest or eastern part of Somalia, you've come to a group called, there are three groups of minorities, and these three groups have historically been part of the greater Somalia. And in the history of Somalia, they're mentioned many times. You have what they call, or they used to call, the Midgan, which is a derogatory word, and it's a terrible word. It's not used anymore. It's replaced by the word Gaboye. And that Gaboye, that's a group of two communities, which is the Madiban, and that's well known for many Somalis, and also there's the Musaderi. They're located in the east, in all parts of Somalia. The other group is the Tumal group, which these are the, as some of the guys saying, these are the technical people of Somalia, mainly working on metals and crafts. The third group is the Yiber group. So you have these three, and they are more physically, linguistically, and culturally similar to the Somalis, and they are indistinguishable from the Somalis.
Right. In terms of now coming back to material, books, things, research done on these minority groups, how has that impacted the image of these minority groups?
That's a good question. The literature that's out there about these three groups is almost, 99% of the time, is biased. It's a literature that's based on not a true research that follows ethics of research, where you go to the communities and talk with them and then document your finding. Most of the research is done by European colonials, or some Somali scholars haven't really done research on it. But that research, whatever they wrote down, has really given a bad image about the Somali minorities, especially the Yiber and the Gaboye groups and the Tumal. Literature that's unauthentic, literature that talks and disregards their history and their contribution to the Somali nation.
In terms of where the minority groups are focused mainly, is there such a claim that first of all that one can make and say, look, their habitat is in the south or in the north? And if so, has it been documented that where the most abuse occurs is in these areas?
Well, historically, first of all, these are indigenous groups. I call them indigenous Somalis because they're located everywhere in Somalia and in Ethiopia and in Djibouti. They're heavily dominant in the north, usually in the north, in the Somaliland area, and as well as in the east. Bosaso has a big population of these people, and as well as in Mudug area and the south. Just that there's no a claim of a territory that they can say this is where we belong, but they're everywhere. They're scattered throughout Somalia.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so, because they are focused at the moment in these areas, that's where they are also mainly harmed.
Yes, they are marginalized. Well, see, when Siad Barre was, at the time of Siad Barre, I believe these groups may have been protected by laws because you couldn't see obvious abuse by going to these people and harm them. There was no such thing. And also during that government, they had key ministerial officials from these groups. You had the Ministry of Defense, you had the Ministry of Justice, you had the Ministry of Education. They were involved. They were part of the society, well-educated groups. However, when that system broke down and Somalia went back to tribalism, that's where they began to face many problems, especially in the north.
Okay. And in terms of one of the things that you've mentioned, that obviously what is now in the north, the minorities being engaged there isn't much of engagement with them in terms of political level. That's one of the things you mentioned.
Yes. Originally, when Somaliland got its own territory back, they formed a meeting, all of the groups, all of the major groups in Somaliland, to how to create their own country. The sad thing about that is none of the minority groups were invited. None of them were invited. None of them, their views were not heard. So they were totally disregarded. And currently, they don't have any key positions in the Somaliland government. They are basically outside of that system. They're excluded.
Now, and so obviously to show progress, one have to be inclusive in terms of policies.
Absolutely. If you want a democratic society, you have to include everyone, including minorities, women. Everyone has to be heard. And unfortunately, there could be some progress, like little progress, but we haven't got to where we want, where people have to be equally represented. We haven't seen that in any, whether Somalia, Somaliland, or Puntland, or any of those.
And now my final question is, what would the vision be for the new leadership in southern Somalia?
Okay. And in the new leadership, my aim is to tell them actually, we have, internationally, we are known for one of the worst countries to have human rights record, the lowest of the low. And because of lack of respect for international laws. So if we want a just society that treats people with dignity and respect, we need to adhere to these international laws. And we need leadership that takes care of this old system that divides the people, of the Somali people, that says, oh, you are from these 4 groups, therefore you're Somali noble, and you don't belong to this minority group, then you're not noble. That ideology has to go away because people are all equal. Nobody is better than anybody. So the leadership has to take that role in collecting the people and have them all get together and see a vision of the 21st century. Otherwise, we're left behind and we will be behind. Yeah. And unfortunately, minorities are not doing well. They haven't got the equality they need because people are still holding to that old culture that says, I am from this clan, therefore I am better person or ethnically superior than this other person. Total nonsense. You know, you live in Europe, I live in America. We know how progressive multicultural societies deal with each other and how they move forward.
There is issue in terms of our theological conviction being Muslims, and obviously the human rights records and human rights laws being actually just drawn up less than a century ago. And adhering to the religious institute would make us one of those long societies who've should have had a human rights law established within their own society and practice. Now, coming back to that and reading a lot of works on even the Islamic science and the way they engage other societies, there has been quite somewhat racism of Arabs to non-Arabs or that sort of things, although the religious sciences say and the verses say that it shouldn't happen. Now, I know there's not easy way of justifying saying why should Somalis be in a special case, but how would we fare in comparison to the historical cases of racism, Ajam versus Arab or that sort of thing?
Okay. Well, in Somalia, you have to understand one thing, and that is the clan system becomes first. It's higher than the Islamic religion. So as a Muslim, we don't say we're Muslim first, and then we're clan. It's the other way around. Clan plays the powerful role, then the religion. And to be honest with you, a lot of religious scholars have been quiet about this subject. They never recommend anything. They never do anything. And the sad thing, like I said, these people look alike. If you look at me or I look at you, you couldn't tell who is minority and who's not a minority. So they've been silent. They've been silent. On the other hand, the Arab racism versus Arabs or non-Arabs, they do have it, but not in this extreme that we have. In Somalia, these people are isolated. For example, if an intermarriage occurs in northern Somalia, it's going to be a big problem. Why? Because so they don't have those kind of things. Ours is an old ideology. It's outdated culture that we need to move on and deal with people with respect, equality, dignity. I mean, many children are just leaving schools because of identity problem. And, you know, kids sometimes can be cruel in the schools, right? So they go through harassment, bullying, just because they belong to minorities, and they end up leaving school, hating the school. And who knows what they would become in the future.
Thank you.
Okay? All right, okay.